Hi, friends. Welcome. We are going to be learning about becoming a beekeeper with the BeeChicas who are on screen with me now. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. We are going to introduce everyone, and then we'll invite you to post your questions to the chat, and we'll answer those during the session. So I'm Kathy Lane, Programs, Events, and Outreach Coordinator with Boulder Public Library. And I'm pleased to be on screen with the BeeChicas. We have Tracy Belhumer, Teresa Beck, Cynthia Scott, and Deborah Foy. And before I introduce everyone, I will talk about a few of the housekeeping. I want to thank Shannon Kincaid, who's behind the scenes engineering our broadcast. This event is being recorded and will be available on Boulder Public Library's YouTube channel and the Seed to Table playlist after today. All of our events are an extension of library services, and therefore library conduct policies apply to our online space. If you enjoy this presentation, there are more online programs for you to enjoy. Please visit our website at boulderlibrary.org for our full events calendar. This event is part of Seed to Table events focusing on sustainable living with gardening, cooking, and BeeChica programs. And I'd like to thank the Boulder Library Foundation for its generous sponsorship of this and so many of our library events that are free to the public. Finally, at any time during this event, you can post your questions in the chat by logging into your Google, YouTube, or Facebook account to post your questions. Your questions will be addressed later during the audience Q&A portions of the event. We'll have about a 30-minute presentation followed by some Q&A. So I'm going to begin with a fun aerial photo of the BeeChicas during a live inspection. The Boulder Public Library and City of Boulder have been working with the BeeChicas since 2015 for Seed to Table workshops. Like this video, you might see them from the Boulder Creek Path taking care of the library beehives on the main library roof in their colorful beekeeper suits. The BeeChicas are also volunteer coordinators for Pollinator Appreciation Month and the Bee Boulder Festival. So if you are curious about this and other resources that we mentioned during the workshop today, you can visit beechicas.org/how-to for resources, recipes, and videos. And so now I am going to share in a brief introduction. We have Tracy Belhumer, Teresa Beck, Cynthia Scott, and Deborah Foy on screen. The BeeChicas are scientists, artists, gardeners, beekeepers, and pollinator advocates, and they educate us in some hands-on ways to get involved, as well as pointing us to resources and classes, like today, if you want to become a beekeeper, or other ways that you can support pollinators. So BeeChicas, thank you so much for adapting what would have been an in-person workshop to this online experience during the pandemic. And I am going to share a video of Sorry, that was the wrong way to share. We want to be able to talk over it. So we've got bees fanning on the screen, and I'm going to ask each of the BeeChicas, why do you keep bees? So we'll start with Tracy. Oh.
Thanks, Kathy. I started keeping bees about 10 years ago, and it was because I looked in a neighbor's hive up at 7,000 feet here on Sugarloaf Mountain, and opening up the hive felt like I was peeking in on Mother Nature. I never felt like a voyeur on Mother Nature until I looked in a beehive, and I was just mesmerized by this little democracy, how they make decisions collectively, and how just incredible these insects are. I should have been an entomologist.
Thanks, Tracy. Teresa, why do you keep bees?
I started keeping bees about 15 years ago. Before that, we lived in Mexico for a few years. Our family moved down there, and I got introduced to a native stingless bee down there called the Melipona. And I would look at these bees going in and out of these tree trunks, and I would go visit this little ranchito and was just fascinated by the same with Tracy about, just the bees themselves. And if you're interested in this type of bee, the Mayans actually cultivate the honey, which is highly medicinal. And we're going to talk some more about native bees at the end of our presentation. But there's a Netflix series called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And in acid, they talk all about the melipona and how the Mayans keep those bees. So anyway, that's what fascinated me about bees.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. Deborah, why do you keep bees?
That's cool, Teresa. For me, it started as an extension of becoming a master gardener in 2007. And now, today, it's exactly that. It's the fascination of bees, and they're such a connector to nature. I'm much more attuned to what's happening in my garden, in our community, what's blooming, the moisture levels, the temperature even, and they're just such a connector with people. I mean, I am never out in my hives when someone doesn't stop and ask me a question or express curiosity about the bees. So it's just a great opportunity for me to educate people about pollinators.
Thanks, Deborah. Cynthia, why do you keep bees?
Everyone has said all of the reasons. I think that we all have sort of the same reasons for keeping bees. I'm a lifelong gardener, gardening at the side of my grandmother and then my mother, and just being concerned about the environment in general. And I started keeping bees when Teresa started keeping bees. And we, it's been a connector, as Deborah said, for friends also. But the reason I keep keeping bees is because I just love listening to the buzz of the bees at the front of the hive and watching them, noticing them in the garden going from flower to flower. So that's what keeps me wanting to protect them and keep them going. And I love, as Tracy said too, that they're like a little microcosm of our whole world. And they can teach us a lot about democracy and helping each other and those kind of things. So they're just wonderful creatures.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Cynthia. Wonderful. I'm going to hand this over to Tracy and Deborah to talk about keeping bees throughout the seasons.
Oh, well, I have one slide up here that I think is really important to start with. Don't you think, Deborah?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So seasonally, you're going to need to inspect your hives often, and looking in the window isn't enough. And that's my daughter about 10 years ago, looking in our top bar hive. But through the seasons, we put together a list of spring, summer, fall, and winter, and the main things that you do each time throughout the season, and how many hours we expect it is for a new beekeeper. So I would say in the spring, that's when you're the busiest, and the fall as well. And really, you want to be checking your bees about every 3 days when you start. So you can't really be thinking about vacations when you first start up a new beehive. And I mean, even if you go away for a month, you probably need somebody to check in on them fairly frequent, like once a week or so in the summer. So do you want to speak to, like, right now we're all concerned about our hives having enough winter honey stores, and we're still concerned about a parasite, varroa mite, every part of the beekeeper season, I think. So we've been all in our hive and looking in the bottom of our, underneath our hives, we can catch droppings from the bees, and we can see what's going on in the hive in the winter if there's mites dropping. And if there are, we're doing natural mite treatments using oxalic acid right now.
Well,
and then,
something I would add to that, Tracy, is we don't have hours listed on the fall because you probably won't get any honey your first year, but for ongoing beekeepers, spring and fall are super busy shoulder seasons because eventually you'll add in the fall honey management. And there's not a lot of economy of scale in my apiary. All of us have multiple hives, and rarely am I able to do the same thing in every hive at the same time. So while that says 1 to 3 hours per week, sometimes I'm in one hive on Monday and another hive on Thursday and a different hive on Sunday, because those hives need different things at different times. So I just wanted to throw that in there. This is for a hive.
Yes.
In terms of time.
That's right. Yeah. We get a break in the winter. We definitely do. This is when we repair equipment, and actually by winter, I appreciate a break. After being in a hot bee suit in the fall, harvesting honey, I'm ready to take a break. But we're always concerned about varroa mites all throughout the season, like spring, summer, fall, and winter. That's something that we try to keep on top of. And if we don't, we end up losing our hives.
That's what I was going to mention, is that we worry over the winter a little bit if our hives are going to make it, because statistically, I think about 40 to 50% of hives do not overwinter. So we are looking at our bottom boards, making sure that they're eating their honey, and tipping our hives to make sure that there's enough stores and honey. And we save back honey and feed it back to them in February and March before the nectar flow comes. So there's some maintenance even in winter.
Yep.
That's a good
point.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say it's a time commitment for sure. So, and you know, the bees are on their own schedule and not our schedule. So Deborah's very attentive with her bees. And so she might be in there a few times a week on different hives, but she gets like a 90 or 100% success rate for overwintering. Like she hardly ever loses a beehive. So those of us that are more hands-off, we could lose, maybe 5 years ago, I was losing more than half of my hive, maybe about 50% of my hives. Now I maybe lose 10%, 20%. So good questions.
I would add that it just illustrates that there's a pretty sharp learning curve for beekeeping. You know nothing when you first start, and when you get a mentor to start helping you, it works very well to help flatten that curve a little bit, so you don't lose hives as much at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, all of us have gotten a little better over the years at keeping our hives alive, and it just takes some experience and managing mites.
So we have a question kind of related to what you're discussing right now. We know pollinators are critical for much of our food supply. Is there any possibility of doing harm by keeping honeybees? And I wonder if this is related to some like the varroa mites that you were mentioning.
I think that's an excellent question. And I think there can be harm in it if you're not a diligent beekeeper who educates yourself and learns how to manage a hive so it's a positive. And, you know, if you're not managing your hives and you're letting your mites get out of control, or you're just managing your hives in a way that they're not surviving from beekeeper error, then you're not really part of the solution. You're becoming part of the problem. You're a problem to other beekeepers in your neighborhood, and you're a problem for the bees that don't stay alive in your care. So I would say there definitely can be harm. And then there's always the competition thing with forage. And honeybees are generalists. They'll go to any blooming flower and get nectar and pollen. And our native bees, which are critical, are plant specific. And so honeybees could crowd out forage for native bees if there was an overpopulation of hives in an area.
Great.
Steve, do you have anything else to add to that?
I would just add that honeybees are part of our agricultural system, and though they might impact our native bees, we can't eat without our honeybees. And I think backyard beekeepers, you know, the good ones are trying to help breed bees that are resistant to mites and that are hardy. So I think in some cases, backyard beekeepers are helping our honeybee population. And we do worry about like putting a beehive in a mountain environment where I live, or an area that hasn't had honeybees before, because of that competition with our native bees and the potential for, I think it's chalk brood to spread. There's not much disease overlap at this point, like from varroa mites to our native bee population, and hopefully there never will be. So.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. Are we ready to show the inspection video?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's wonderful.
All right. Sure. And Deborah, do you want to talk through what's on screen?
This is a couple of BeeChicas up on the library roof doing an inspection. So when we talked in that earlier slide about inspecting your hives, this is what we mean. You get in it. You have your suit on, you've got your gloves on, you're up close and personal with those bees. It's just fascinating. It's what every one of us talked about, the fascination of a beehive and seeing them at work. And it's not just all fun and games. You have to educate yourself and you have to know what you're looking for. But this is a picture, you can see the queen right there on the top, the long skinny queen on the top of that frame. And we're pulling frames out and we're looking for a queen right hive, which means that we have a queen in that hive that is laying eggs, and that hive is thriving. And I think Tracy has a slide she can pull up, and she's going to speak to what that means and what the different types of developmental stages are.
Yeah, in that inspection, we were really lucky that we spotted the queen, but that's not only what we don't have to find the queen to know that the hive is queen right. We have to see that there are eggs and worker eggs at that. So we have to be able to identify that it's a female egg in a cell, and that the queen is laying pretty well. So in this slide here, you can see they look like rice grains upright in the center and the bottom center of the cell. And we know that the queen laid those. And the hive is queen right. And then we look for disease, and you can see that these larvae are like plump and glistening and very white, and that's a good sign. And then we have to know like a few things, rules of thumbs, like and how long is an egg, how long is a larva. So there's just like a thing you can remember: 3 days egg, double that, 6 days larva, and double that, 12 days pupa. And then an adult bee will emerge. You could see that on the bottom left.
In a mere 21 days. It's just amazing.
And then here we have a video of a queen laying. Tracy, you want to talk about this one?
Oh,
the copper queen.
Yes. Yeah, this is copper queen, and this was on the roof of the library. We weren't sure that the hive was doing well until we found this frame, and she was actually doing extremely well because she was laying right in front of us in full sunlight, because most of the queen's life is in darkness, except for when the hive will swarm. But she's lowering her abdomen into a cell, and all of her attendants are smelling her and licking her and spreading her pheromone around. They're really excited that she's laying eggs, you can tell.
And I love how you can see the circle of bees around her, surrounding her. That makes it easier for people to spot the queen.
And funny that you mentioned that, Kathy, because there's a drone just ignoring her walking past.
It's so true.
Yeah, and that's one of her.
Care less.
Yeah, that's one of her, probably her males that she laid an egg for. So actually, right now there are no drones in the hive, and the queen stopped laying over the winter, and now she's starting to build up the brood nest. And in the middle of that cluster of bees in our hive right now, it's probably 95 degrees, and she's starting to do just this and build up a workforce for like the spring nectar flow. So they won't even start laying males just yet until mating season.
Great. And we have a question. Cynthia, when would you say the season begins and ends for taking care of bees?
Well, as Tracy put it, we're always doing something year round. So every season we're doing something, but the big season probably starts February, slowly, March a little bit, and the big push is April, when you have to start checking your hives often, splitting them, getting them ready, making sure they have enough room for the queen to keep laying without them swarming. And then it slows down a little bit in the summertime when the honey flow is on. We don't like to disturb the hive as much. And then it ramps up again, as we were talking about honey season, and varroa mite treatments are really important in late summer and fall.
Great. Thanks, Cynthia. Teresa, can you answer a question? How many bees are in a hive?
It depends on the time of year. In July, midsummer, there could be 80,000 bees in the hive. And then it can start to taper off in the fall. And then by November, December, there's a cluster of, I would say, 5,000 to 8,000. Do you think more than that, chicas?
Probably like a package of bees. When you start with a package of bees, about 10,000.
So yeah, 3 pounds, 10,000 bees. And then right now, January to February, as Cynthia said, they start building up their workforce for the spring nectar flow. And we get pollen in March from the maple trees, and then nectar starts flowing in April. And they'll start building up their workforce again.
Yeah. Thanks, Teresa. And Deborah, would you say a beekeeper can count on getting honey every year that they're a beekeeper?
No, I wouldn't. Honey is never a guarantee, and it's all about available forage. So if we are in a drought, or if we have late freezes, that happens often, actually, where things will start to bloom and we'll get a late freeze and we'll lose, like we did this spring, all of our fruit trees. Well, fruit trees are a huge nectar source for honeybees. And so we beekeepers were in a lot of trouble if we didn't have stored honey, or we had to feed sugar water, basically. So honey is never a guarantee, and we all beekeep very bee-centered. So our bees get all the honey and we take the leftovers.
So that happened to me this season. I had 0 honey. I saved back about 100 pounds to feed back to 7 hives. I've yet to feed them back, but I will start when it gets warmer. I'll check them and put frames of honey inside each hive.
Yeah, I would say honey should never be the primary reason for keeping bees.
Yeah. And for me in the mountains, I only get honey when I have a moist year, when I get enough rain. So nectar follows rain.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I might, I'd put in a plug for planting native flowering fruit trees like our native plums, because this season, those made it through our frost. They're much more equipped to be grown here in our in the Rocky Mountains. And so if you plant native plants, then you might get a little more honey.
That is an excellent point.
Yes. Yeah. Should we move on to cost and equipment? Do you think?
Let's do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's Cynthia and Teresa.
Right. Cynthia, do you want to talk about the different hive types? Because one of those hives is yours with that swarm attached to it. And it's a different kind of a hive.
Yeah. So these are the
larvae.
Yeah, these are basically the 3 main hive types that we have in the United States right now. The one on the far right, which has the 2 beekeepers by it, is the traditional Langstroth hive for the U.S. Commercial beekeepers use that hive. And most of us have either all or most Langstroth hives as far as the BeeChicas are concerned. In the middle, you see the top bar hive. And this is a pretty common hive also in the United States. It's the hive that comes from Africa, and it's all horizontal. And some people really like the horizontal beekeeping. In fact, they're making all different types and styles of these horizontal hive because you don't have to lift the boxes off of the top. And so that's the top bar style. And the one on the far left, as you can see, has a swarm of bees on the outside. That's the Warre hive, and that's a French style hive. And Emile Warre invented that hive for the people. And it was a hive that they use a different style of beekeeping. They nader by putting a box on the bottom when you add boxes to the hive instead of supering on the top. And it's a smaller backyard hive that was supposed to be more hands-off, and it worked very well up until the varroa mites came in. And it's harder, I would just say it's harder to treat both the Warre and the top bar styles because the treatments for varroa mites are not standardized for those types of hives. They're a little different size and shape and orientation, and so that would be the one reason that I wouldn't try these different hive types as your first hive, because you can get a lot more support on the Langstroth style for beginners.
Right. I wanted to just plug that in there too, is that the Langstroth lends itself to our climate. And that's because the bees can move up. They start in the lower box in the fall, and then as they eat through their honey stores, they move up and warm air rises, so they stay warmer at the top. And in the springtime, we find them at the top and sometimes put them back at the bottom and empty frames on top so they can build their comb. But I think the Langstroth works really well in Colorado.
If you want to collect honey, if you're raising bees for pollination and just for like just a small hive, a top bar could be appropriate for you if you really want a honey production Langstroth. But I was going to say, Cynthia, I think we've combined the best of like the Warre method with the quilt box and natural foundation in the top bar, all in our Langstroth. So you can be a natural beekeeper with a Langstroth.
And I think you're going to hear the Chicas speak frequently about take a class, take a class, take a class. And I think you'll find the most support in classes in the top bar or the Langstroth for sure.
And the reason we want you to take a class is because you need to recognize what's going on in a hive. When you see something like this, a beekeeper really needs to intervene. And
we'll just tease you with this isn't typical.
Yeah.
So take your class and you'll know what we mean.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot going on in here.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's move on to our next slide after this one. Okay. These are the equipment costs. So we just kind of estimated a beehive with bees costs about $500. And then you've got all of your, your equipment, your suit, and veil and everything. So it can be costly to start a beehive. Anybody else have anything to say?
I think I would add to that we don't really recommend just having one hive either.
True.
It's really, really difficult to manage one hive because when anything goes wrong, you don't have resources. And so if you have two hives, you can share eggs, you can share food, you can move your bees around. And so really your costs, that's $550. That includes a lot of your suit and other equipment, but you'd probably need to add another $200 to $400 for a second hive and more bees unless you split. But, realistically, you need two beehives if you're going to be a beekeeper.
Yeah, or you need to be in a community of beekeepers, yes. Especially like you don't know if your hive is healthy or not until you can compare it to another one.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are a bit over on our time. Should we talk a little bit about native bees?
Oh, let's do, because they're so cool.
Okay.
We all try to support native bees in our yards with native bee houses. We help build a native bee hotel in front of the Boulder Public Library. We're just as fascinated by native bees and attracting them to our yard as our honeybees. So I think
Kathy has a video.
Deborah, I think this is your Mason bee house. If you want to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about what's happening here.
Oh, I will. I'm sorry. I thought we were muted during the video. Yeah, this is a little Mason bee laying eggs, and then you can see the plugs in the end of those tubes. So this is a little native bee house. They're solitary bees. They don't require any management. We don't do anything with them. We put them in our garden and we surround them with lots of native plants, and they do an incredible job of pollinating. So this native bee will go in the tube and lay a series of eggs and then plug the tube at the end, and it will overwinter, and those bees will emerge in the spring. And it's just an amazing, fascinating process. They have stingers, but the stingers can't pierce our skin and they're not aggressive. So they're wonderful to have around kids. If you've got children at home, all the BeeChicas have multiple native bee houses. We are big, big promoters of native bees.
And Deborah, isn't that mason bee, that's a female, isn't she like 100 times more efficient at pollinating? She'll come out on rainy days compared to our honeybees? Like,
yes. And mason bees are the early ones for the fruit trees, right?
Yep. So
There are blue orchard bees.
Yep. So they're just incredible bees. And I was thrilled because I actually was using that little native bee house as a demonstration for some of our workshops that we do. And I had it up by my house. And I walked by one day, and here this little mason bee discovered it and just decided to hang a occupied sign on it. So it's out of commission, chicas, for the workshops.
And we have a little how-to site or section on our website, and you can learn how to make your own native bee hotel from our website, and you can learn a bunch of things on here. And I'm trying to find how to make a native bee house.
And Tracy, don't we have an upcoming workshop next month on native bees and how to make a native bee house?
In March. Here it is.
Yay!
Yeah. So I guess we're almost to questions. We've got just a few more minutes. I mean, we have a lot of questions that we could answer for you, like how to get bees or anything about keeping bees in Boulder.
And do go to our website for more resources on books. And we can't stress enough, if you think you want to move forward with honey beekeeping, then take a class, and you can go to the Colorado State Beekeepers Association website, csba.com, for a list of classes and ways to educate yourself. And what's the other one? BCBA? Do they list classes, Teresa?
They're both on our website link,
Okay.
the CSBA and BCBA.
Perfect.
Yeah, the CSBA is where you'll find all the local classes and where to purchase bees. It's a good resource.
And if you're not going to be a beekeeper but want to support pollinators, plant native plants. I know we've said this before, but you know, a great what's on our bookshelf list, and we all have our favorite books. But there's some handbooks on how to keep bees and how to support native pollinators.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Shall we ask a few of the more specific questions?
Sure.
That we had some ideas. So the list that you had of equipment costs, are there any other ongoing costs that you'd need to budget for beyond the equipment that you had listed?
A first-year beekeeper often loses their package of bees in the first year. I would say about half of them. Well, so that's an ongoing cost. So $150 a year to purchase bees, and then your equipment, mite treatment. Formic acid is another organic method for treating mites, and that's not that much though. But you know, if you do produce honey and you get lucky, beekeeping has now paid for itself in our yard, in our home, because we put a honey sign up at the bottom of our driveway. And last year we had a good moisture year and we're able to sell some honey.
But in order to extract that honey, you need to buy an extractor. So you need to buy extracting equipment, which can be costly, unless you share it with another beekeeper friend.
Yeah, and there is a CSU extension that has one you could sign out for free, and you could crush and strain honey as well in a bucket. But don't expect to get honey, like Deborah said, in the first year.
And then speaking of having beekeepers, it's we also have a mentorship program through the BeeChicas called the BeeChicas Buzz. And it's really helpful. I think it was at least very helpful for me at the beginning to have friends to bounce ideas off of and ask questions, because you can read and read and read, but till you get hands-on and then have a specific question, you really want someone to be nearby that you can ask those questions. So make friends or find a mentor who lives next door would be ideal, who could come over and just peer into your hive and say, that's a problem, or that's not a problem.
Well, and that's an excellent plug for a class, because of course you can learn a lot of this by reading a book, and you can go on YouTube to a trusted site and learn about bee inspections. But part of the beauty of taking a class is that network of other first-year beekeepers.
Yeah.
You meet other people, you have your Facebook group or your Google group, and you can bounce ideas off of each other and learn together. And I think that's a critical component. It was for me when I started by taking a class. And those people that were in my class were hugely important.
Yeah, and I taught for Growing Gardens, a beekeeping class, for about 8 years, and those beekeepers formed communities, and they still work together, help each other. A lot of them have joined the Buzz for extra support, but it's always a community that's the most important, I think, out of those classes.
And of course, I would recommend having a class, taking a class before getting bees, or shadowing a beekeeper. That would be a great way to be introduced to beekeeping. And if you even enjoy it, is to get in the hive with another beekeeper.
That's an excellent point.
And there's a good question, and we did say at the beginning that you can access. So the question is how to get bees, or should we purchase them locally versus mail order? And the answer to that is most of our package bees are coming from Northern California, where their spring starts sooner than ours, where the queens can mate much sooner than the rest of our state or our country. So there are local sources, but they tend to come from California anyway.
And so you'll want to go on to the websites like Colorado State Beekeeping Association has a list of vendors, and also the Boulder County Beekeepers Association has a list as well.
So one thing I would add to that is a package of bees is about 130 now, right?
At least.
If you can swing it, I would 100% encourage you to buy a nuke from a local beekeeper, because those are overwintered bees in Colorado. If they're healthy enough to overwinter and be split, you know that you've already got a pretty good thing going. You get 5 frames of bees with a queen, and it's just, I think, a much easier way to start a hive, and you're also supporting your local beekeeping community.
And that's about $200 or more is a nuke.
Yeah, I think they were about 180 last year. So it's not a huge difference, but I do think it's just a huge difference in ease.
I think Cynthia has something.
There's one other thing we haven't mentioned, and that is getting on a swarm list. If you do have friends who are also beekeepers, Fresh Swarm is a really nice way to start a colony. And if you collect it yourself, you'll have to go with someone if you haven't done it before, but it's really very amazing process. But catching a swarm is another way to get bees.
And that would be the peak of our beekeeping year. I think that's the highlight every year.
Yeah.
Kathy,
I love it.
Did we miss a question?
So the question from Josh is, given the dry conditions and forecast for more of the same this year, is it a good idea for a first timer to even try to set up a hive this year?
I think if you take a class, you can make a better decision. It's soon going to be too late to order bees. People are ordering packages of bees now, but you could, what do you guys think? You certainly could start this year if you're ready.
I mean, it's hard to know what our snow situation is going to be the rest of the month or March. March and April have some of our heaviest precipitation. So I think it's always a great idea to just take a class, know what you're getting into. If you know some beekeepers, see if you can jump in and help out and see what's going on and then make a determination. It has its own set of challenges every year, whether it's dryness or freezes or, I mean, I don't really know what to tell you. There will never be a year without a beekeeping challenge.
Oh yeah. One year, our new bee students at Growing Gardens had snow for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Put their packages in their bathrooms.
Yes.
In their garages. And one of them had a hole, I guess, in the package. And anyway, it was quite funny.
Yeah, filled their bathroom with bees. I mean, every year presents some kind of challenge.
Yeah.
And the swarms are actually a wonderful challenge to have because it's one way that we can diversify the genetic and share a healthy bee
Yes,
hive.
it's how they reproduce. So if a hive is swarming, typically it's because it's healthy and large and splitting off.
But it also means that the beekeeper wasn't able to manage the overpopulation in the hive and maybe split it. So there's things you can do to prevent swarming that we all try to do, but we still let them reproduce. But we just we do it with them.
Yeah, and so
yeah,
the Boulder County Swarm Hotline is for people to report a swarm as well as to try and get on the list to receive a swarm. Is that correct?
Yes, 1-800-SPY-BEES.
Great, and that number is in the chat. Cynthia?
To get on the list to collect a swarm, you probably should have some experience. You should be taking a class or have taken a class on beekeeping, and you should join your local beekeeping club, like the Boulder County Beekeepers Association. And through your club, you can get on the swarm list. And there's a very centralized swarm process where people call the 1-800-SPY-BEES when they find a swarm. And there's a swarm dispatcher for the entire state of Colorado who calls the person in the area where the swarm is that's managing those beekeepers. And they have a list and they go down the list.
By zip code, right?
Yes, for who's closest to be able to go catch that swarm. It's really important to catch the swarm really quickly. So if you're not a beekeeper, or if you are a beekeeper that doesn't want to catch a swarm, keep your eyes out, especially from April through June. That's swarm season. And we'll put that up again front and center on our website also. It's 1-800-SPY-BEES. So please call so that we don't have bees landing in people's rafters and causing problems. Or
have people call exterminators, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Oh.
So Teresa, we have a question. From Shay, I would love to look further into beekeeping, native bee houses, and helping the bees, but I feel a little nervous around them. Do you have any advice for how to feel more comfortable around bees?
Education. I would find a beekeeper and, just partner up with someone, find a mentor, or take a class. But it's really important to know how gentle honeybees are, especially when they're swarming. I mean, they eat all this honey and then they leave the hive, and they are the most docile at that time. But they do not attack people like wasps do. Most of the stings, I bet you 95% or more, are from wasps and not from bees or native.
No, specifically just yellow jackets. Wasps, I mean, most wasps are gentle. It's just the yellow jackets that can sometimes be
aggressive. Yeah. But I would say, educate yourself and learn about them.
Yeah.
And also, sorry. I was going to say, for the question about native bees, Shay, we invite you to attend our next workshop on Wednesday, March 10th, same platforms, and you can learn more about native bees, and those do not have stingers. So we'll talk more about the sweat bee that you might feel a little taste of your sweat on your skin, but there isn't a concern about native bees. That's the same way that if you have a concern about getting stung by wasps or honeybees.
Well, and there's a funny joke. The males don't have stingers, so don't worry. unless you encounter a female. But most native bees have stingers, but they don't sting. It's the Melipona that doesn't have a stinger.
Oh, thank you for correcting me, Tracy. Great. And another question is, do you need a license or any kind of approval to have a native bee house versus a beehive? And are beehives approved everywhere?
Well, that's a really important question. Backyard beekeeping is legal in Boulder. I think Lafayette just passed backyard beekeeping and chicken rearing in the backyard. I think just last year they approved it. So you do need to check in your own municipalities on the rules and regulations around backyard beekeeping, and especially if you live in an HOA, because HOAs often have very different rules than just general communities. So before you run out and make any major commitments, it would be good to look into that. But in Boulder, it's legal to have backyard hives.
And my understanding is native bee houses, there is no ordinance against that.
Good point. Yeah.
You can have native bee houses.
Great, thank you. And I think this is our last question. So Josh is asking, do you all teach classes, and where would you recommend getting classes for beekeeping?
So the CSBA website, which is linked on our browser, it's if you want to show Kathy, it says what's on our browser in the classes and resources. If you click on Colorado State Beekeepers, there's a list of all the local classes that are ongoing. The Boulder County Beekeeping Association has a class starting in October and one that started in January already. And none of us teach any, none of us teach anymore, but we do have a mentorship program called The Buzz, and we meet 4 to 6 times per year. And just, it's really helpful as a community to find out what each other's doing in their hives. Like Teresa's usually ahead of me, and it reminds me that, gosh, I better get my mites unchecked and test them. So.
That's only because I'm in the valley, Boulder Valley, and she's way up in the mountains.
No.
So we do have one more question from Beth. How do I find a beekeeper, and where do I take a class? BCBA doesn't have open classes right now. Do you have any other places you'd recommend? Does Grain Gardens have a class, or McGuckin, or Harlequin Gardens?
Just has a beginner class that I teach, but it's not an extensive one. But if you look at these slides here that I have up, usually not during COVID, the BCBA, that's the Boulder County, the Northern Colorado has a really good class that's 3 Saturdays. Denver Bee Club doesn't have a class, so they use the University of Montana, an online class that might be going now. Mm-hmm. And Hudson Gardens has some drop-in classes.
And that's in Denver. Hudson Gardens is in Denver.
But if you go to that coloradobeekeepers.org education, there'll be a list of all the local classes.
Great. Thank you, chicas. This concludes getting started in beekeeping with the BeeChicas.
Beekeeping, BeeChicas.
Yeah.
So thank you, Deborah Foy, Teresa Beck, Tracy Bell-Humer, Cynthia Scott, for inviting us into your homes and for teaching us to make our scientific observations and directing us to places where we can learn more about supporting bees, becoming beekeepers, and improving our environment. Thank you, Shannon, in the background. Thank you, Boulder Library Foundation, along with all of you who have tuned in and asked such great questions. So we do invite you to our next workshop, which will be March 10th at 4 o'clock on YouTube and Facebook. And members of the audience, if you know others who would enjoy this event, the session has been recorded and will be available to watch on the Boulder Public Library's Seed to Table YouTube playlist. You can visit boulderlibrary.org/Seed to Table website for upcoming programs. I think the next workshop we have is a cooking program. And visit the Boulder Library Foundation to support them in the workshops that we have. And I want to say thank you so much to all of you. We'll see you next time.